Hey co-stars, welcome to this Generation Films video about 10 little known features of the USS Voyager from Star Trek. You know, Voyager was a pretty unique ship, like it's the only Federation ship where you see an actual kitchen on board. I guess that wasn't part of the original plan. Now, in this video, we are going to go through 10 little known features of the ship that you only see in the odd episode, were later enhancements, or were originally planned for the ship but never seen on screen. Number 1. The aft lounge. You probably know Voyager's mess hall, where Neelix's kitchen was located. Here, senior officers could get a panoramic view of space while they enjoyed real food prepared by the Talaxian chef. But you may not know that Voyager had an additional aft lounge on Deck 11. You don't see it in the show, but it is depicted on the writer's room diagram of Voyager by Doug Drexler. The lower decks of Voyager look something like this, with narrower corridors and the occasional rock star hanging out.
Captain on the deck!
So we can guess that the aft lounge is also a smaller affair with less choice of food on offer. It also had windows that look out from the rear into space, so it kind of be like watching from the back of a ferry as you sail away from port. Number 2. Tri-Cobalt devices. When Voyager was flung out into the Delta Quadrant, it was carrying Tri-Cobalt devices. These were not standard issue on Starfleet ships. The devices had a yield of 20,000 teracochrons and could cause subspace ruptures to form, although not to the extent that they would be deemed subspace weapons and banned under the Khitomer Courts. In Star Trek Online, the Tri-Cobalt device is the most powerful Starfleet torpedo, even more powerful than a quantum torpedo. In a piece of unused dialogue from Star Trek Enterprise, Malcolm Reed tells Captain Archer, Tri-Cobalt puts out a lot of heat, at least 5,000 degrees. Voyager used 2 Tri-Cobalt devices to destroy the Caretaker's array, leaving nothing but dust and metal fragments. Number 3. The Aeroshuttle. Now, you may have seen the captain's yacht from Star Trek Insurrection. It launches from the underside of the saucer section of the Enterprise. Well, Voyager did actually have a similar craft called the Aeroshuttle. Here you see it launch from the same place as the captain's yacht and descend towards a planet in this demo VFX footage produced by Foundation Imaging. You clearly see the outline of the Aeroshuttle in every episode, but it was actually never used on the show. Rick Sternbach would later explain this by saying that the Aeroshuttle's hardware hadn't been completely fitted out when Voyager left for its mission to the Badlands, and then because they got flung into the Delta Quadrant, there's no way a Starfleet technical crew could come and help them finish fitting out the ship. To be honest, that's a pretty lame excuse, considering that Voyager's crew designed and built the Delta Flyer from scratch, and it worked really well. How could they not be able to fit out and make flight-worthy a half-finished starship? Anyway, the Aeroshuttle was based on the design of the Danube-class runabout from Deep Space Nine. You can see this in the 2-window design of the cockpit, and also the main body of the ship bears some resemblance. It was capable of warp 3 and could enter the atmosphere of a planet with a 450% improvement in atmospheric flight endurance over a typical shuttlecraft, presumably because of its more aerodynamic wings. If you want to know more about this ship and also specifically why it was never used, Dave Cullen has a great video talking all about it. I'll put it on the end card of this video and in the description. Number 4. Borg enhancements. Voyager received a number of enhancements while it was out in the Delta Quadrant, and some of these utilized Borg technology given to Voyager by 7 of 9. The Astrometrics Lab is a good example of this. It was designed by Harry Kim and 7 of 9 and incorporated Borg technology to make the sensors 10 times more accurate than what Voyager had before. The lab could simultaneously measure the radiation flux of 3 billion stars. The Voyager crew used the lab for charting space and plotting their course home from the Delta Quadrant. The increased accuracy of the system was able to knock 5 years off their journey. Voyager at one point also made use of a Borg transwarp coil to knock 20,000 light years or 15 years off the trip. Number 5. Emergency Command Hologram. The Emergency Command Hologram came about when the Doctor, a hologram himself, added daydreaming subroutines to his program and dreamed up his role as the Emergency Command Hologram, or ECH.
Activate the ECH.
He would take over as acting captain if other members of the crew became incapacitated, like if they were assimilated by the Borg, for example. And as the ECH, the Doctor grew a pair of holographic balls and delivered a set of one-liners that really put the Borg in their place.
State your designation.
Emergency Command Hologram. At your service.
Designation unknown.
Not for long.
Pity it was all just imaginary. He even dreams up imaginary weapons.
Computer, activate the photonic cannon.
Now the Doctor does actually suggest his role as the ECH to the captain, who at first refuses, but then is eventually forced to utilize the emergency command hologram against the hierarchy. Even the photonic cannon makes an appearance. The ECH is activated again in the two-part episode Workforce, where the entire crew is kidnapped to work in a slave colony, and the Doctor runs the entire ship by himself, waiting to rescue the crew. Number 6. Bioneural circuitry. The Intrepid class of starship, which Voyager belonged to, was the first class of Federation ship to have bioneural circuitry. This system used bioneural gel packs that contained living cells instead of the isolinear optical chips we see on Star Trek The Next Generation. This apparently speeded up computer response time, but it came with its drawbacks. Since the computer was now essentially a living being, it was susceptible to viruses and bacteria. Voyager's crew at one point had to induce a fever-like situation by heating up the ship in order to kill a virus. Then, since these bioneural gel packs can't be replicated, they had trouble procuring new ones and eventually started switching over to more traditional isolinear circuitry. Number 7. Ablative generator. I'm sure you've all heard of ablative armor. It's one of the features of the USS Defiant, an external skin that burns off at a controlled rate when it's hit with weapons fire, protecting the ship. Well, sometime after the year 2378, Voyager's crew invented an ablative generator, which would generate an armor casing around the ship in order to protect themselves from the Borg. But this would become an alternate timeline, as future Admiral Janeway embarked on an illegal mission to travel back in time and deliver this technology to Voyager so they could make use of a transwarp hub to get back to the Alpha Quadrant 16 years earlier than they would have done if time travel wasn't involved. It's strange, I thought the future Starfleet took tampering with the timeline very seriously.
She instigated a phaser fight at Utopia Planitia. She was seen by you and Lieutenant Tuvok 2 years before she joined your crew. And she interacted with her past self in front of 15 crew members at a ping pong tournament, approximately 6 minutes ago. Your time frame, of course.
Of course.
Needless to say, we need to clean up the timeline.
Why the Federation timeship Relativity didn't show up is a mystery to me. Anyway, at the same time, Admiral Janeway also delivered another technology to Voyager. Number 8. Transphasic torpedoes. These weapons were supposedly developed on Voyager during the later period of their journey back through the Delta Quadrant. But Admiral Janeway delivered the specs of these weapons to the Voyager crew when she traveled back in time to 2378, and they were able to use the weapons to destroy the Borg transwarp hub and destroy a Borg sphere that had captured the ship. So Voyager got the weapons early. When Voyager made it back to Earth, these weapons would then have been handed over to Starfleet. While not official on-screen canon, the Star Trek novel Greater Than the Sum gives some interesting information about transphasic torpedoes. Transphasic torpedoes were the only Starfleet weapon that the Borg had yet to adapt to. This is because the weapon generated a subspace compression pulse with multiple components. Shields could only block one component of this pulse, while the other compression pulses could get through the shields and deliver the majority of the force of the weapon to the target. In addition, each torpedo had a randomly generated transphasic configuration, so the Borg could not predict the configuration of the pulse that they would be hit with. In another novel called Lost Souls, the Borg do finally adapt when the specs for transphasic torpedoes are sent out to an entire fleet during a Borg attack. Anyway, when Voyager used the weapons, they yielded impressive results. One transphasic torpedo could destroy an entire Borg cube. Number 9. warp core ejection and recovery. Many Starfleet ships can in theory eject their warp core. There is a diagram of how the system works in the Enterprise D's technical manual. But in practice, the system always seems to be offline. It seems to be one of the first things that gets knocked out in battle, which is kind of crazy because after losing a battle is exactly when you would need it. Anyway, Voyager actually had a reliable warp core ejection system.
Computer, eject the warp core.
In addition, the warp core, after being ejected, if it was still intact, could actually be reinstalled using tractor beams. But if the warp core had exploded, then you would want to utilize our 10th and final feature. Number 10, spare warp core. Yes, according to the writer's room cross-section by Doug Drexler, Voyager had a spare warp core. You also see it on Voyager's Master Systems display on the bridge. This is never mentioned in the show, and there's even an episode where Voyager's warp core gets stolen after being ejected, and it's vitally important that they get it back, otherwise they'll have no warp drive. So I'm guessing that they ditched this idea in order to make use of certain plot points that would rely on the ship just having one warp core, like the warp core getting stolen and them having to race to get it back. But let's get through what we know. The core that is actually in use is the rear core. You can see main engineering labeled on the diagram, and also when they eject the core, you can see the position is further back on the hull. The secondary core is most likely supposed to eject out of its position on the hull and then be towed by tractor beams and inserted into the main warp core position and hooked up to main engineering. Rick Sternbach, the designer of Voyager, did at one point suggest that it was just more like a bunch of spare parts rather than a fully operational spare warp core. But then what would be the point of storing it assembled in its own bay? You could just store all the parts separately in cargo bays and use them when you need them, far more efficient. I prefer the explanation of something along the lines of the Enterprise B in Star Trek Generations.
Tractor beam.
We don't have a tractor beam.
You left space dock without a tractor beam.
It won't be installed until Tuesday.
How big is your medical staff?
The medical staff doesn't arrive till Tuesday.
Load torpedo bays. Prepare to fire. My command.
Captain, we don't have any torpedoes.
Don't tell me. Tuesday.
Voyager left for its mission in the Badlands without a fully functional spare warp core because they thought that they would be back to the Alpha Quadrant before long, and the spare warp core would be installed on Tuesday, as would the fully operational Aeroshuttle. Okay friends, that is our 10 little known features of the USS Voyager. If we've forgotten any, please leave a comment below, or you can tell us your favorite one. As always, please subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you next time on Generation Films. Bye bye.